Hey everybody, this is Matt Powell with Convergent Technologies, and people are going to be filing in as we go, but I appreciate everybody that is jumping onto the live version of this. We are recording it, so if you're joining us from YouTube or from the Convergent or Genetec website or wherever, because you weren't able to make the live event, I really appreciate you jumping on. Like I said, my name is Matt Powell, and I am Convergent's Transportation Market Manager. So I oversee for Convergent all of our transportation and especially aviation initiatives that we do. And the reason that I wanted to do this format right here where we put it out everywhere for aviation lessons learned is that I think a lot of times people see us from Convergent or our partners and manufacturing partners. They see us at shows and at conferences, and we get this 30 seconds to talk and try to do a pitch, and then we got to move on to the next thing. And that's just not enough. So I wanted to do this so that we can have an actual conversation, not just a webinar, but an actual conversation where people can, kind of hear how Genetec and Convergent talk to each other. And so we will have a webinar going on in the background as a reference. But what I wanted to do is bring on our partners from Genetec. We have Joe DeGrassi and Jared Mossman. Joe, Jared, if you want to introduce yourselves and tell us a little bit about Genetec for those that don't know.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and kick it off. This is Joe DeGrassi. Matt, thank you again for setting this up today. We're really excited to be here. And thank you for anybody who's attending the live session and looking forward to some of the questions coming in. My role at Genetec, I'm actually one of our directors of business development, and I run a few different things here, but one of them is our consultant and A&E program globally. I'm in charge of managing the program, managing the team, coming up with different types of things like specifications and documentation to help the industry write specs and work with the end users to deliver a consistent message. I also manage our airport practice throughout the US, and Jared and I work together to kind of make sure that we're driving solutions and products specifically for that market. Jared, I'll let you go ahead and kind of kick off your role here at Genetec.
Yeah, thanks. Appreciate you guys letting me join. I am the airport practice lead here for the US, so I work closely with Joe and his team, communicating directly with the airports, as well as the consultants that help in conversations regarding the projects that you guys are doing, and excited to be a part of the conversation today.
And we will have, if you have questions, go ahead and submit them. If we're going to answer it at that time, we'll go ahead and answer it. If not, we're going to hold them all to the end so we can keep the flow of the conversation going. But do you guys want to tell us a little bit about Genetec?
Yeah, so for those of you who aren't familiar with Genetec, we're completely privately held, organically funded. We are a software company. We are not a hardware company. We don't really want to make hardware. We want to give our customers choices, and we support all of the best of breed different hardware manufacturers, open architecture hardware manufacturers that are on the market. We're the largest video management system in the world. We're a top 3 in access control in North America. We're the only company in the world that can say that we're a top 7 in all the categories we play with, which is intercoms, access control, license plate recognition, and video, all built into one software. So one software is a top 7 globally in all of those categories. And we also secure about 50% of the world's top airports. So pretty exciting time to be at Genetec too. We've been building solutions specifically for aviation, which is kind of one of the things I know, Matt, you wanted us to discuss today. Genetec, we've moved away from kind of a one-size-fits-all approach to development. And then Jared and I are actually on a team where we're responsible for understanding the current market. And I know, you and Matt and I have worked on a couple different products that we're trying to build right now for aviation. But back in our team in Paris, we have about 5 engineers that all they're doing is building products specifically for aviation. So that's kind of an overview, 30,000-foot view of kind of who Genetec is.
Joe, we were talking about this yesterday, and I know when we were preparing for this, we were going to talk about it later, but how does the #1 VMS software provider in the world end up the #3 access control software provider in the world? Like, how do you do that path to go from video? Because typically in the industry, it's always been segregated for the most part. I mean, the access control providers might have a little video plugin, and you use that, but they're really about the access control or the video. How do you end up going how does the number one end up the number three in a completely different, kind of subcategory?
Yeah, and it's an interesting conversation because if you go back to the history of Genetec, when we first built Synergis, which is our access control plugin, we had a customer. It was the West Edmonton Mall, and they are, I believe, the largest mall or the second largest mall in North America. To put that in context, you look at Mall of America over in Minneapolis, they are number 5, and that shows you how much bigger it is over in Edmonton. Wow. But they had been a long user of Omnicast, our video product, and they had a proprietary access control, didn't like it. They came to us and said, hey, can you build this for us? We originally weren't really looking to get in the space, but lo and behold, we listened to our customer and we built that product. That was the beginning of Synergis over 15 years ago. Within a few years, though, we realized there was a lot of commonality. Over 70% of the functionality between the access and video were common, and they were literally sitting on almost the same code set. So Pierre, our president, still the same guy that wrote our initial code, still running the company, said we should combine those into one platform and call it Security Center. Now, fast forward, over 15 years, Security Center encompasses access control, video, LPR, intercoms, all with the same code set, which has really helped propel us. I think as end users start to realize, having a platform that narrows down the complexity all on one single software really resonates with them. And now we have customers that are up in the 30,000 reader range. We have airports that are over 2,000 readers. So it's kind of an exciting time, but I think that unified message has really helped propel us in the market.
Now, with that, first off, have you guys ever been to the Mall of America?
I have, yeah.
Like a roller coaster in there.
Mighty Ducks. I don't know if you remember that. Emilio Estevez riding around, but.
Oh yeah, that's right. That's right. I don't know if they allow you to eat some of those Wetzel's pretzels or whatever on the roller coaster, but that place is insane. So looking at data, because if you've got the video, you've got the access, you've got the LPR, you've got all these different things you've got all these different data points. Talk us a little bit through, and if you're following along on the webinar and you're looking at the screen or at the presentation, you're going to see this, but hopefully Joe can kind of talk us through this. If you're not, talk us through kind of big data. You say it here that in 2020, there will be 40 trillion gigabytes of data. Walk us through this because this is pretty complex.
Yeah, Jared, I'll let you kind of cover that one actually.
Yeah, thanks. So, I'm just doing some research and prep for this call. That was one of the things that stuck out, was 40 trillion gigabytes of data. And being that airports are basically cities inside of cities, the amount of data that's coming into airports is just drastically overwhelming, whether it's from hardware, from various technologies, from different software applications, from different databases. There's just an overwhelming amount of data that's coming in, and for an airport operator, we continue to see the same trend where they're just completely overwhelmed. Where about half of the security alerts are actually being investigated. A lot of the teams, they literally just say we are overwhelmed, right? About 80% of them. And the one piece that really sticks out is then on the slide, you'll see that there's approximately 20 separate systems and technologies that are deployed in an average SOC. So you can imagine, someone trying to manage all these different alerts and events and all the other crazy things that are going on. For them to try and juggle that, that's one of our core messages at Genetec is to try and streamline that and make life easier for these operators to really understand what's going on and not just be completely overwhelmed. There's different use cases and conversations we can have in depth a little bit later on those, but yeah, overwhelming amount of data that's just hard to manage with all these disparate systems that were never really intended to communicate with each other.
Well, if you break these numbers down, so for the folks that can't see this, it says 90% of operator time can be linked to dealing with false alarms. 56% of security alerts received are investigated. So there's a correlation right there, that if you've got a high number of false alarms, And then you've got over here where it says that compliance-driven procedures have increased 50% since 2014. So I'm kind of taking a shot here, but it seems like the video management systems, or these overall systems that we're talking about, this data is what used to be security. Now compliance-driven procedures are starting to creep into that. So when you combine a high number of compliance-driven procedures that these systems are being used to deal with, you've got a 90% operator time being linked to dealing with false alarms. That kind of makes up that 56% of security alerts received that are actually investigated.
Yeah.
Would that make sense?
I think so.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's absolutely correct, because all these continual changes require everybody to go and invest in some other new software, some other new technology to make sure that they're compliant, which then can in turn create false alarms because maybe it wasn't perfectly installed, or maybe not the right use case for that solution for an airport, and then in turn it turns into an event that doesn't get investigated. So do we know if it was critical or maybe it wasn't, but how do we know?
And then you've got, and I'm just looking at the numbers here, but if you're working in an airport in operations or security or whatever, these are pretty fascinating numbers. You said that operator/dispatcher churn between 60% and 100%. Do you know the time frame for that? Did they say the time frame? Or is that just kind of a typical few years or something?
That's a good question. It's from a Cisco report, so we'll go back and pull that. But I think it is over a certain period of time. I don't think it's like an average per year or anything, but it is over time. Well, I'll double check for sure.
So you got 79% of security teams feel overwhelmed. 90% of operator time can be linked to dealing with false alarms. You've got, procedures that are compliance driven, not security. You go in, you want to go work in the security operations center, and next thing you know, you're dealing with compliance stuff, and a 60% to 100% churn rate. So this right here, if I was an airport looking at why am I losing people? Why can't I keep the same people in? Why can't I keep that experienced hand that can kind of visually, that can tell somebody, oh, that's a false alarm, it always kind of happens, versus, hey, you really need to look at that. These numbers kind of tell that story with the data. What kind of data points, Jared, do you think should be brought into a security system in an airport with this type of stuff, when we're kind of looking at this?
No, that's a great question. With Security Center, it's basically been the same since day one, right? It's three pillars of intelligence. It's three pillars. It's about intelligence, business, and security. So it doesn't matter if it was a Starbucks or an airport or a nuclear power plant. They're all getting the same thing. But the challenge obviously is everyone has very specific needs. So IoT and big data, it's really changing the way we architect and manage this data. So it's important to us that we start recognizing what are the specific needs of our customers, right? So we literally created an airport team across the globe that we're a part of, Joe and I, to better understand what are the specific needs for these airports. And so we started looking at, some of these changes that were happening in terms of like compliance, very specific needs that they had that maybe a Starbucks or a nuclear power plant wouldn't have. So we're starting to see, really everything that the airports are dealing with, all of this data should really come in so that the complexity goes away, right? So we want to be able to take in data from like the AODB, or the Airport Operational Database, so we can start seeing, stuff related to flights and stuff related to passengers and to baggage and all the other components that drive that. When we start looking at compliance and passenger flow and the overall passenger experience, being able to have that data to improve that passenger experience is critical, because we want more passengers coming to our airport. So it needs to be the best airport in the region, and we got to be able to provide that best overall experience. So being able to have that data at your fingertips and to be able to react quicker and be able to plan better, we really want as much data as we can in there, to break down silos between these different these different groups.
We're looking at a slide, typical view of monitoring. And if
Yeah.
you're listening to this, you've basically got the scrolling list of activities that are happening. Access denied, stolen credential, AC fail, alarm triggered. It's just a scrolling thing that constantly go. And you got three things at the bottom. It says, what just happened? What is happening now? Have we seen this 3 hours ago? Can you tell me what that means? What just happened? What is happening now? Have we seen this 3 hours ago?
Yeah, so this is a great slide for those that can't see it. Make sure to watch the video, but this is a great slide because there are so many events that happen inside your VMS or your access control system, whatever it might be. One of our airports, actually, when we were visiting with them to identify some of their challenges, they literally have 6,000 events that happen per second. And so you can just imagine, we go back to that slide, we're talking about people being overwhelmed. How can we identify what really just happened? Is it critical? Is it not? Can we react to it when in an automated process? So these guys have to deal with, all of these events that are happening, and how can we actually manage it? So, our biggest goal in terms of these types of events, specifically at airports, is to streamline, and narrow down all of the noise, right? So let's eliminate the noise and identify what's actually critical.
So let's say that I'm going from, and we just did this at one particular airport that I don't really want to say airports names, but that Genetec or Convergint and Genetec just won. In defining these, so let's say that you're an airport out there and that your people, they're spending, 90% of their time trying to figure out what's a false alarm. They're spending, close to 60% of their time, or 56% of the security alerts are, actually investigated. Do you recommend, have you guys seen where they should pull these types of things and start to work on it? Is this something that is specific to you? Like, what kind of advice would you give an airport when it comes to if they have a Genetec system? So, Convergint, we have a lot of airports that have Genetec systems. What should we be doing, and what should the airport be doing to kind of help reduce these types of percentages? Should they be going through and looking for this type of stuff and seeing, like, what do they do with this data?
So I'll take that one. I mean, so,
Sure.
The one thing I think is if they have a really, really strong integration partner like you guys, they're going to be able to get a lot of these types of resources. I mean, someone like Matt that truly understands airport operations, Matt's team that actually gets the why, the how, that type of experience and skill set is really, really valuable towards an end user or an airport, because you guys actually bring that expertise to the table. That's another reason why, partnering with a national integrator like Convergint is such a valuable thing for an airport to do. That said, the idea of the tool is that it can be refined, and that we're going to leverage, a correlation engine on the back end to then narrow down the noise. Take some of these transactions that we know could be related to one another, and then say, because these things happen in these types of sequences, now we're actually going to create an incident, and that incident, we want to make sure that operator follows step by step the way that we want. In some cases, we actually even recommend that maybe the airport have a consultant, an independent consultant, come in and even audit their policies and procedures. Maybe no one's looked at their policies and procedures in a long time, and it would really, really benefit them to have that happen. But at the end of the day, I think that is a big reason why partnering with somebody like a Convergint is so valuable for an airport.
You just nailed something that is so important, and we tell people this in the identity management world. And in a week or two, we're going to be doing a lessons learned on identity management, which is when you get a new video. Most people, if you look at identity management, we had one airport that when we went in and we looked at their workflows and so forth, they had something where, if you went to deliver one type of piece of paper to one person, then somebody had to go with you. And we said, where does this come from? And they said, oh, that's TSA regulation. That's not TSA regulation. When we started looking back in it, it was they had a badging office manager like 8 years previous that got mad when there would be somebody that would go and they talk to somebody else and they take too much time. So he got irritated about it and made a rule that if you went to go do this one particular thing, you had to have somebody with you. And when you get into, this is one of the things that I think airports, sometimes all clients have a hard time with, is don't try, when you're getting a new video management system or you're doing a new update or you're doing, hey, I'm getting Genetec and I'm converting from XYZ, or we're going to the next level and I'm also going to be adding, this module over here. It's a good time to hit that kind of reset button and to look at the way that you're actually operating, because there's no better time than when you're going to be getting a new system. And I think what a lot of our clients, we have to educate them on this, which is you may be doing stuff that made sense when you had analog cameras 8 years ago. It doesn't make sense with what you have now. That you got to be willing to push that button and really look at yourself and kind of be, self-reflective and self-aware of what you're doing. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges out there, is that, being willing to go in and update your policies and procedures, or like you said, going out and get a consultant to come in and help you update those policies and procedures, because that is the biggest reason that you see that these systems kind of fall apart over time. And people blame the system. Oh, Genetec's terrible. Well, you got 15-year-old policies and procedures that you're trying to apply to a 2020 high-tech piece of software. Software is not the problem. We got to update those policies and procedures to make sure that we're staying within the modern world. I think a lot of people think of that when they think about things like identity management, but not on video.
No. And I mean, not on video, on access control, some of the policies that they had beforehand, on LPR, on ticketing, on parking, on all these things. I mean, the way that things were done 20 years ago, no one's really gone back through in a lot of cases and audited these things. That's the way it's always been done. And someone said, hey, that was a regulation we were complying with. That's the reason we did it that way. And then later we figure out that, well, actually, no, that's not the reason that was done that way. What's funny is I was on a call with a consultant who was joking around about an airport that she was doing an identity management overview. And there was something going on with the badging office, and they kept saying, no, this was done this way because this is compliance and blah, blah, blah. And then she coincidentally was the person who wrote that procedure 20 years ago. And she's like, I didn't write that because it was a compliance thing. I wrote that because that was the only way we could do it within our operations at the time. But they actually thought that was part of a compliance measure. And she called them out and said, actually, I'm the one who wrote that, and that's not a compliance thing. So, it's an interesting thing because it's case by case. It's quite often, even in access control, we're finding that every airport does things just a little bit differently. So I think that's, again, why it's so valuable to have either that trusted consultant that can help you audit those things, or a trusted integrator as well, or maybe the combination of the two.
This is one of those conversations, like what we're talking about right now. When I said that earlier, people see us at shows, or they see us at a conference, or they stop by your table, or I get a coffee or breakfast with them for 20 minutes or whatever, that they don't get this type of conversation. That if you have statistically 79% of security teams feel overwhelmed, operator churn between 60 and 100%, I'm not sure what the time frame on that is, and 56% of security alerts received are investigated. 90% of operator time can be linked with dealing with false alarms. You buy a system like Genetec to get an operational and financial return on investment, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So if this is the basic, if you're out there, you're in an airport, wherever you're at, and you're a security director, your operations director, you're head of the SOC, whatever it is, these statistics, you're probably seeing them. You're seeing this type of stuff. And a lot of it, we just need to buy a new piece of software to put on top of the Genetec system. That'll make it even better. Then you're just adding to that 90%, you're adding to the false alarms. You're adding to, the security team being overwhelmed. Great, now I got another piece of equipment. Look at your policies and procedures first. Make sure, talk to us, Convergint. We got people on our teams we got some of our guys on Advanced Solutions that are absolutely incredible with the amount of knowledge that they have. and you guys got the same at Genetec, like have that conversation. Hey guys, is there anything that we can do better? Because we're probably thinking it, but is there anything you think we could do better? Let me take a look at your policies and procedures. Now, I think a lot of the industry that people that I talk to, because all this data has to go somewhere, and all these different things. I think some airports, not every airport needs a PSIM, because what we're talking about right now sounds like a PSIM, right? I mean, it sounds like what a PSIM exists for. Not every airport can afford a PSIM, either financially or operationally. Not everybody can do it. So, when we're talking about that, and I know sometimes it can be a dirty word because of how it's been done, previously in the past versus there are some airports out there that have very successful ones. But how is this for the airports that have maybe looked at a PSIM and said, man, I can't afford that, or operationally, they're just not at that level or whatever. How does this differ from it in terms of data?
Yeah, so it's interesting on the consultant side, even before we developed Mission Control, which by the way, Mission Control we built for an airport that was having all these problems. I think Jared touched on that. And that's kind of, I guess, a PSIM-esque product. But a lot of consultants, even before we had Mission Control, would say, Genetec, you're almost like a PSIM light with Security Center, because access control, video, LPR, and intercoms all built into one core software, one user interface. We don't have all these other user interfaces and software sitting on top of each other. You don't have all these data connectors and all these things you got to deal with. The SDKs and PSIMs are kind of limited in what information they can share. What's interesting about Mission Control, nothing integrates to it. It is literally just another tab in Security Center that, based off of events that are happening in Security Center, we're able to leverage those events through Boolean logic to create incidents and then have the policies and procedures. You don't have to train them on multiple softwares. We can change the status of what goes on in Security Center based off of an event in Mission Control as well, which is kind of unique to it. But I'd say one of the biggest things, Matt, you just talked about there too, is costs. Mission Control is $15,000 MSRP per operator per workstation. So if you have a couple operators that need it and those are concurrent licenses, we can look at like $30,000 MSRP compared to the millions of dollars that it costs to do a PSIM. And then any of our plugins, any of the data that we're bringing into Security Center, most of those are managed by Genetec. If it's a plugin by Genetec, we manage them, we update them, we keep them. There's no burden on the end user to have to worry about those things. So it's kind of a unique model that we have, much more cost effective, much more cost efficient. The unified message and bringing in all these things, it's already one software, so it's a single user interface. We're not based off of SDKs, so we're not limited amount of information that are sharing. It's literally just another extension inside of Security Center.
So when I look at 56% of security alerts are investigated, 90% of the time it can be with false alarms. The big word out there right now, I'm sure everybody that works in an airport security operations, is analytics, analytics, analytics.
Yeah.
You need analytics. It's like the Robitussin of the security world. You just need some analytics on that. Like my question would be, here's how I look at analytics, unless in terms of our deployments of them, our lessons learned on them, is that they very quickly become noise. Because typically what happens is that when we go in and we take over a video management system and we're going to convert it from one to Genetec, a couple of things typically happen is, like we talked about, we asked the airport, hey, can we take a look at your policies and procedures, and can we revamp some of these to address the way that that Genetec is going to be used? And then the second thing is they say, and we say, okay, we're going to be utilizing these analytics. You got to have a lot of time on analytics. You got to make sure that they're accurate so that you're not adding to that false alarm rate. They can add noise, is what I'm trying to say. Like, if you're going to look at analytics, you have to look at a lot more than, let me just buy this analytic, install it, and start working with it. Even the most kind of robust analytics, from the basic stuff, like, okay, somebody's been loitering next to that door for 5 minutes and it sets off an alarm, to the really complex stuff, they kind of become noise. Can you talk to us about analytics from Genetec's point of view, and kind of how you guys resolve some of the challenges when it comes to that noise?
Yeah, so I mean, analytics are an interesting thing. End users, quite commonly, they'll watch CSI and they'll see, somebody saying, "Hey, let me zoom in, zoom in," and then, next thing you know, you're looking at a small little screw, and you can see that it was Matt breaking into that car, and they're like, "We gotcha." Obviously, those things don't exist in real life, so there's always that. Regardless of which one of our partners that make these really great analytics, they're always dealing with that as well. So we have these wonderful, solutions that we also resell, but then there's also solutions that our partners make. But if you look at even the most accurate analytic, let's say we're getting to something at like a 98% accuracy. In an operations center, if we use it and it's in an environment where maybe it has 100 transactions that come in from that analytic, that means there's only 2 false alarms. That's really not that bad. That's something that an operator can ingest and work with. But if we put it in a busy environment that maybe has 10,000 transactions that analytic would be utilizing, that means that we would have 200 false alarms. And if you think of that every day on top of all the other transactions that we're talking about, at that point, it definitely becomes noise. So they're a tool that can be used, but with Genetec, we look at it as, okay, leveraging Boolean logic, leveraging a data correlation engine on the back end to consolidate a variety of analytics to make sure that because all of these things happened in a sequence, or all these things happened after one another, or in conjunction with one another, or in parallel with one another, that they are actually something that operator should be looking at. We had an airport over on the East Coast we were talking to, and they spent a bunch of money on an expensive PSIM, and the only function they're using it for was someone leans against a crash bar. They put a SIP intercom out in the hallway and a big sign that says, "If you lean against this crash bar, please call and pick up the phone and dial this number." So the person, leans against it. It happens all the time. They see it, they panic, they pick up the phone, they do the intercom. And what they were looking the PSIM to do was say, okay, door forced on the access control system, followed by a call on the SIP intercom within a certain time interval, and that is not actually someone trying to get out on the airfield. But if we leverage analytics in that environment, we can say, okay, door forced followed by, let's say, an edge analytic on a camera for motion detection, and then another one for a line cross. And then further down, we leverage, like a Bosch analytic for a facial capture that captures that we have the person's face. So now we know somebody has to be not just opening the door, but running down a hallway. And because all of those things happen in sequence, it's a much more significant incident for that operator to follow.
Hold on, Joe, before you keep going, what slide should we be on for the folks that are following at home?
This is the perfect slide right here. I want to kind of airports. I wanted to talk an interesting story. So facial recognition is a huge topic of conversation when we sit down with the majority of our airport customers globally. And it is a great tool. It is a very, very good tool to be used. But even the most accurate facial recognition systems sometimes fail. So the story I wanted to tell was about a gentleman named Stephen Talley. He was a financial advisor out of Denver. And he actually was wrongly accused twice of robbing 2 banks by the FBI's facial recognition system. And he is actually right now in a lawsuit against Denver. But directly off this photo that we're showing, for those of you who can actually see it, you have the image of Stephen on the left, and then the culprit on the right that actually was the offender that robbed the bank. And you'll see they look very similar. They looked at their ear and the way that it was pointed. They looked at some markings underneath his nose. They look at the way that his lip kind of came back. He even had a marking on his neck that was very similar. If you go to the next slide, this is Stephen today. So Stephen, unfortunately, lost his job, lost his home. His wife left him. And now he's actually in a lawsuit against the FBI and the Denver police seeking $10 million because he was wrongfully prosecuted. He was later, obviously the conviction was released, and now he's out on the street and he's homeless. And he was a very successful financial advisor. If we go to the next slide.
I think if you look at the original slide of him, and then that's kind of everybody at work pre-COVID.
Yeah.
And now you go to that, and that's everybody right now.
Yeah, I wish I could go.
That's why I'm not doing webcams or anything. Like, hey Matt, get on this video conference. That's okay. Like I look like the guy that was falsely accused of something right now.
I coincidentally even have a hat on backwards right now.
Yeah, earlier we were talking about, do we want to do the video? And I was talking to somebody the other day, and they were like, "You really don't want to do the video right now with me." I think we would be a distraction for for doing this. But so now we've got hundreds of examples. Convergent's seen this. It's kind of interesting. When we first did one of our airports with you guys, we put in the analytic, and it was. They wanted to use it for local upload of people that were, hey, it's shoplifting, or hey, it's this, or hey, it's that, right? You know, we want to be able, we want to be able to take a photo of the person and upload it. And all the analytic proved, we said, okay, let's do the proof of concept. We're going to do a shootout. So we brought in 3 different analytic modules or servers to put on. We defined the behavior. None of them worked. And so the airport said, well, man, this analytic stuff, why doesn't it work? All it did was prove that their cameras were not high enough definition to work on it. And so they couldn't. So the good news is once they realized that, we were able to target where we wanted the analytic. So, okay, we need it here, we need it here, we need it here. Now we're going to update these cameras to the highest, 4K level cameras that we can on these specific areas to do a very specific task. Like, you don't have to do analytics. Some types of analytics you don't have to do through the entire airport. You just got to do them in very particular spaces. It's kind of like gunshot detection. If you put it at your entrance and your exit and your baggage claim and so forth like that, and you kind of work around those vulnerable areas. With analytics, what this airport discovered is, okay, we need to update these specific cameras for this task. Then the analytics were working fabulously, and we had very low false alarms. They were very accurate in the way that they were operationally done. But, you're saying here that there's hundreds of examples of this type of thing.
Yeah, I mean, just to run through a couple of them. The first one is the New Zealand government was using it, and this gentleman, he's of Asian descent, and it literally said it was denied because the subject didn't have his eyes open, which is, a really, really bad situation for an airport to be in, because, that's a little bit of discrimination, unfortunately. The next example is, the London police. What's funny with the London police is they named their system the Super Elite Recognition System. It was the Metropolitan Police of London, and their facial recognition system came back with a 98 false positive rate.
They called it what?
They called it the Super Recognition System, or the Advanced Facial Recognition Unit. And after 100 alerts, only 2 were actual suspects, which means they had a 98% false positive rate. Now that's still good. I mean, that's
maybe we should advise people not to create an acronym for your analytics until it's proven out that it works.
Yeah, until it becomes an actual proven thing. But and then the last scenario was just an older one, but with the Boston bomber. I mean, that was years ago, but they had thousands and thousands of images all over the place, and still weren't able to use even the most advanced systems back then to be able to identify the face. So yeah, the idea behind this, if you go to the next slide, is really any different data point. We've been talking big data. Analytics are just another type of big data. Video is a giant piece of big data. Jared talked about IoT devices being parts of big data. Genetec, we're really big in cities. We have some cities with over 40 to 50,000 entities that are brought into one security operations center. So you talk about big data. I mean, we're talking, hundreds of thousands of different types of just devices coming into a system, and then trying to correlate those with events that are happening between all of those devices. How do you make sense of any of that? So we're Genetec. What we're trying to be as a security software company, an operational software company, is, regardless of who's using the system, whether it's a police officer within an airport, whether it's someone in IT, whether it's somebody in operations, we want to be able to figure out how to correlate any of these multiple different data sets that are coming into Genetec, and leverage things like open protocols, leverage things like, we built an airport data connector. So when we're tying into an airport's operational database, it's all streamlined. Our facial recognition, partners, we have a data connector we built for that they can use, so it's consistent information coming in, and then figure out how to correlate that data so it's actually usable. Make the system intelligent enough that make it so it's usable. How do we actually make it so the stuff makes sense? And then at the end of the day, that unified concept, not just on the core level, but also on the UI level. So once we have all this information coming in, we correlate it. How do we put it up in a visualization layer that makes sense, that people can actually, use it on a normalized manner? That's kind of what Genetec is, and that's where we're trying to go. And I think our customers are pushing us that direction.
One of the when I put this on LinkedIn and so forth, and people, I said, we're going to be talking about a different type of virus, not COVID and so forth, but there's a virus that it's almost kind of a cultural virus when it comes to security, and it creates vulnerabilities. There's that virus of fixing policies and procedures with technology. We just need another piece of technology to put on there.
Yeah.
And, instead of fixing the policy and procedures and make sure that you're updating them, that creates like the virus of false alarms. Because I used to work on the end user side, and I've worked in the manufacturing side, and I've worked in the end user side. And, the virus of false alarms creates a massive vulnerability because it creates a culture of, oh, that always happens. Oh, that happens all the time. And whether it's an insider threat of somebody that, wants to work there, and they know that, they know where these false alarms are created. They know that the culture exists. We talk about insider threat a lot, but I think a lot of people don't talk about, what are the different elements of insider threat? And, these are the types of things that when you have this kind of virus of complacency, well, it's always been this way. We're going to fix policy and procedure with more technology. Don't worry about that false alarm. It happens all the time. We don't do anything with this data. I mean, we collect it all, but we're not really doing anything with it. These are the types of things that generate vulnerability. They generate an insider threat. That if you have somebody that knows those points of vulnerability, and then you fire them one day and they come back. The first gunshot detection deployment that we ever did in an airport was in the admin building, because they were afraid of somebody coming and, attacking or open fire. They were afraid of an active shooter where people were being fired, not where people worked. And so when you have these types of vulnerabilities that are kind of created by that virus of complacency, you fire somebody, talk about an insider threat. They know all of these different areas. That's why updating policies and procedures are important, not just putting technology on top. That's why, making sure that you address the root cause of false alarms. That's why making sure that you're actually utilizing your data is so important, that I think a lot of people just don't think about this type of stuff, because I think the industry, and like I said, we're just having a conversation kind of mixed with sales education.
Yep.
But I honestly think that what's happened in the industry is that it's much easier just to sell something than to actually look at the root causes. That's my biggest lesson learned, is that it's a lot easier to go in and say, hey, let me sell you this way of writing a specification to get you a new video management system, instead of, why do you use your video management system the way that you do?
Yeah, why use the overall security system that way, right? It's a lot. It's so much broader now than just video management. There's so many things coming into these systems. So how do we use our overall security system in our operations? I think you touched on a couple interesting things there, Matt, too. It's one of our airports that helped us build mission control said they would have 1,000 alarms in queue, and then an operator would just come in at the end of the weekend and auto acknowledge them all. You talk about potential threats and risk management. Auto acknowledging 1,000 alarms and not reviewing them. How many of those were critical? And I think some of the other things you touched on kind of reinforces the value that a consultant brings. I mean, obviously I run our consultant program, but having a consultant working with an end user on an owner's rep perspective, and just kind of getting in for the day-to-day and, trying to educate on the why and auditing those policies and procedures. I mean, that's such a valuable thing for an end user, and I think sometimes it gets missed. Convergint also supplies a lot of that expertise. So I think, you guys are really in a great position because of the team that you run, Matt.
I think if we go to the next slide and we look at it, because we've got, 15 minutes left. One of the things that I often hear, and I think it transitions into the kind of cybersecurity conversation, is I often hear like, Genetec's a jack of all trades, master of none. Genetec is just doing all these different things out here. They've got all these different options and so forth that, why don't they just do video management? And when you look at it from the video side versus the data side, we're moving into a generation of security technology and a threat environment that is about the data. I mean, how do you guys kind of look at when people say you're a jack of all trades, master of none? Genetec does everything, but they don't do anything particularly well. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think that's kind of a funny thing, because you look at, the first slide we had, we've grown, we're outpacing the industry on the access control side. We, a few years ago, we were a top 7, now we're a top 3 player, according to IHS research. Our cumulative annual growth rate on access control is around 45% over the last 5 years. The industry itself is growing somewhere between 3 and 7% year over year. So we're really outpacing it. It's not a small number. We're obviously a very, very large player there. And I think sometimes that complacency and perspective has really actually helped us, because sometimes our competitors look at us that way. But overall, what Genetec, I think if you talk to Pierre, you talk to our president about what we're trying to be, we're trying to just be a data aggregation tool in a security operations center. We're divided our business into 3 sections, and Security Center itself is one of those sections. That's security. Operations are things like mission control, data correlation, those kinds of things. And the last section is intelligence, and it's really, as we have all of this data, as we look at it all, how do we actually normalize it into a way that is ingestible and usable? And if you look at everything from our roadmaps to our development strategies to just the way that we're developing products, it's really built around the nature of those 3 pillars. And I know Jared talked about that earlier, but that's really at the core of what Genetec is. We're trying to be a data aggregation tool, something that is able to leverage, these millions of IoT devices and bring them in a way that actually makes sense and is usable. Helps form collaboration between different business entities. How often do you have an end user that, one team doesn't talk to another? And this video information could be usable for them. You talk about an airport worried about retail. Why aren't they using that video data? Or like, Jared's old company, CrowdVision, why aren't they using passenger analytics and passenger flow to understand how to leverage that even in a retail environment? Tying it into point of sale systems, those kinds of things. Those are all still valuable for airports. So, we're looking at ourselves more as this operational tool that's able to ingest a lot of different data points.
All right, everybody, if you have a question that you want to ask, I know we've been rather thorough, but if you have a specific question that you want to ask, please feel free to jump in and ask it now. And then I think you just talked about something that I often say, which is, that we have to educate the airports on how to utilize this technology. It has to go beyond what camera are you using? Oh, I just spec'd in this, 1080p 360 thing, or what, there has to be that education level of this is how you actually utilize a lot of, I mean, when you look at this slide right here, and then we'll talk about cybersecurity, because, all of these devices that are plugged into these systems create vulnerabilities. But when you look at this right here, the amount of data that you can get out of this, if you utilize it properly, especially for, an airport that, you've got a lot going on. You're a growing airport, but you don't have as many people as you need. This type of stuff is just, it's gigantic when I look at some of these things. So somebody asked, what is the cost for Genetec solution? We will get to that in a second after we get through the next slide, which I just talked about. When you have this many devices, this many points of data, a camera isn't a camera, it's a sensor that's gathering data. But in the traditional sense, but now we're talking about a ton of different devices that you can plug into. We just worked on a perimeter intrusion project with you guys where you're the incumbent, and we had all of these different systems that are plugging into the perimeter, and it blew my mind how many systems we were plugging into your interface. But it does create that kind of vulnerability. What do you guys have to say when it comes to, the cybersecurity side? Do you see any best practices that you recommend on cyber hardening from the Genetec security system from that perspective, you guys?
Definitely. I mean, so what's interesting, so you look at the Target hack, right? Target was interesting because it was an HVAC system, and somebody had left the default password on an HVAC system, and they used that as a backdoor to eventually get into Target and compromise, millions of data points. So Genetec, we're looking at it. We have all these different IoT devices on our network or brought into our system. Our system will automatically scrub all of those, and it'll tell you, as long as it's a known device, but we have thousands and thousands that we support, it'll tell you if the password is weak. Very weak, meaning it's the default. Weak is something like 0000 or 0001 or whatever it may be. And then if it's a strong password, so it'll actually give you that password management. You look at the Equifax hack. Equifax, that was a Microsoft Windows update, a patch that they were recommended to do. And the IoT manager basically decided, or the CIO said, this is going to cost too much. I just don't feel like doing it. Unfortunately, that's a vulnerability they use as a backdoor to get and compromise millions of US citizens. So Genetec, we actually now, if you're connected to the cloud or if you actually get into our firmware vault, we will automatically even audit the firmware of the different entities that are connected to our system. And with our gold partners, we can audit and say, let's say you have an Axis camera or, some of the different door controllers out there. And, we know that there's a published vulnerability. It'll actually pop up and have a warning to that IT person saying, hey, there's a known entity on your network that has a potential vulnerability. The other nice thing is, this actually came from a consultant, but, we have this hardening guide, and it's a really, really elaborate hardening guide of hundreds of pages. And again, not all of our integrators, I wish everybody was, as good as, Matt's team, but sometimes maybe they don't know how to do it. So I came up with the idea of why don't you guys take that hardening guide and put it into the software and have it as a digital scorecard. And this is leveraging everything from, certificates. Are you doing encryption and transfer? Are you doing encryption at rest? Are you leveraging a certificate between the workstation for the directory and making it so we can prevent man-in-the-middle attacks when you're logging into the directory, which is kind of the brains of the system, all the way through password management, all the way through even firmware and things like that. And it'll actually give you, as the end user, a cybersecurity score, telling you what we would recommend. And if you have certain areas that are potential vulnerabilities, you can break that down and it'll make those recommendations to you and even take you to our hardening guide of those sections to walk you through step by step of these ways that we look you should do it.
And one of the things that we do have, so this is where when you talk about teams, that we have a lot of options in terms of the integrator side. A camera or whatever sensor that's out there can be the most secure thing in the world unless your integrator leaves the login information, to be admin root and password pass1.
Yeah, leave it on a Post-it note and leave it on the darn thing, right?
Exactly. Talk about, like I said, that virus of, if you have policies and procedures that don't have a password tracking tool, or you don't have those types of things, that don't have these types of hardening pieces, it doesn't matter what you install, you still have the vulnerabilities. And I think the key is, like I said, hit that reset button when you're looking at purchasing these products. Now, if you go on the Convergint website, you'll see that we have our own cyber offering. So if you are a Convergint airport partner out there, make sure that you ask your account executive, or you can hit me up and ask us about the things that we're doing. We've already done it in a number of airports. We can give you references on that. in terms of hardening. You don't have to be a Convergint airport in order to take advantage of that. So we do have our Convergint cyber offerings, which are actually really well priced in terms of competitiveness out there. And we also try to work with our friends over at Genetec when we're installing Genetec to make sure that we've got a number of things in there to harden the system. So even if we do the install, and then we're going to close with this, with you guys talking about kind of the pricing structure, even if we do the install of the system, and then if we do the Genetec system, and then you have another integrator in there who is maybe, working on a contract to install cameras, we're going to make sure that even if your integrator out there who's installing the edge devices does not change this type of stuff, that it still doesn't create a vulnerability coming through. So there's a number of layers when it comes to the cyber side. But one of the questions that we had is, what's Genetec's cost? So how are you guys? We can't tell you a price because it wildly varies. But how are you guys structured when it comes to pricing?
Yep. So we do not. So some of our competitors will do it. When you buy access control, you got to buy a package of 50, regardless of how many you need, or a package of 20, or any of those things. When you buy an access control with Genetec or video or LPR or intercom, you buy a base license, a base package. And then that base package gives you a certain amount of feature sets. So if you're, need some really advanced stuff, then you buy an enterprise, and those are different structures. When you buy an access control controller from Genetec, we do not charge licensing. You have the licensing built into that controller. So we don't, nickel and dime you on the access control side. Quite often we end up being much, much more cost effective. And on the video side, then you just pay a per video license. When we start talking about some of these advanced things that we were dealing with, mission control, again, 15 grand does, you just basically sits over the top of security center. We're not like a PSIM where you have to, pay per entity or per device or any of those things. So the costing structures just change. The AODB integration, you have to buy our data connector. That has a price. There's just different things depending on what you want. Normally, no one is ingesting everything we do. So we can work with you to kind of figure out the best way to price that. The only other one thing I wanted to just cover on cyber, just as we had a second, was OSDP. Just because my background is HID, and I came from kind of that world. That is another thing on a vulnerability perspective that I'm glad to see the consultant market is starting to lean towards. But leveraging things like supervised OSDP, that is a very, very key thing that an airport should be looking at, because of the potential vulnerability to weaken. So then I think Kevin also had a question about integrated drone technology into the security infrastructure. If you want, Matt, you want me to take that one, or do you want to kind of run with it? Or
what I think is interesting is drone detection or usage of drones for perimeter. Because we've been hearing a lot. I mean, like I said, this is a conversation. We've been hearing a lot about, having eventually in the next, decade or so, the technology is going to get good enough that you could put drones on the perimeter to swarm an intrusion. And that way you control the drone from the software. But I think he's probably talking about drone detection. Okay. So drone technology, go for it, Joe.
Well, so two things, and I know we're right at the point to wrapping up. What you just talked about right there, Matt, we actually have deployed over in Europe. We have a partner that has a drone that actually lands automatically into this giant cabinet, and then it folds up, and then it sits there and charges itself. And based off of our PID system, which we call RSA, when we have a detection in a certain area, the drone will automatically fly to that area, and then the operator can control the video while it actually tracks that subject. So the camera on that is a little PTZ, and we can control it, and then say, click one button and it flies back to bay. Unfortunately, that's not approved in the US right now, just because of the way the TSA regulates drone management. But that is actually something that we're doing right now in Europe. On drone detection, it really depends, and that's a much larger conversation, but that would be put into our RSA plugin. We've deployed some, in London Heathrow. We had some different people doing different testing and things like that. And we have some other ones locally in the United States that have tested some of these PID systems. To me, none of them have seemed incredibly accurate. It just depends on, you know, how elaborate of a radar system you want to use. If you have a really, really elaborate radar system, they actually do get pretty darn accurate. And we can bring that data in RSA and then visualize it with breadcrumbing and things. Some of the lower cost solutions, you know, we have a couple partners that build some of the lower cost radars that are pretty accurate, but they're not going to be as accurate as those really high-end systems. And what I found in a lot of cases is, you know, some of the mid-tier airports just don't have the funding to buy those types of solutions.
So it's going to be amazing to see what technology comes, especially if you're trying it out over in Europe and you're showing a success rate. But we have reached the end of our time. So this will go up if you joined late. Make sure you check, you know, my LinkedIn or Joe or Jared's, or you can check the convergent.com website to see where we're going to be kind of syndicating this, so you can go back through and listen to the whole thing. I really appreciate you guys jumping on and having this conversation. And, you know, if you're a Convergent airport and you want to have this type of conversation, that's what we're here for. Just talk to your account executive, talk to me and say, hey, I want to have a real conversation with you guys in Genetec about my system and what can we do to make it better. It doesn't have to be come in and show me 30 slides. You know, we can just all talk on the phone and talk about these things if you're a consultant or another manufacturer or whatever. But Joe, Jared, I really appreciate it. You guys are great source of knowledge. And hopefully we answered everybody's questions. If we didn't, feel free to drop me an email, matt.powell@convergent.com, and I will make sure that your question gets answered. You guys got anything else?
Nope, just thank you very, very much, guys. The Convergent partnership is very, very valuable to Genetec, but also to me. So really appreciate everything, Matt, and the team over Convergent for putting this together.
We appreciate it, guys. Thank you so much. Everybody have a good day. Stay safe, and we'll talk to you soon. Keep an eye on the LinkedIn and the website for the next one of these conversations about identity management. Thanks, guys.
Thanks.
Thanks.